Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to do the purl stitch. I've already cast it on. So what you want to do is totally different from the knit stitch, but it's also the same, if you get what I mean. Instead of going through the back like the knit stitch, you're going to want to go through the front. So you're going to want to go through the front, hold your needle, and throw it over your right needle, because you always want your working yarn in the front. And then you're going to wrap it around your right needle, just like that. I'm not close enough to the end yet. Take your needle all the way to the end, but push the point through the back. Okay? And then you have a loop, and you're going to slip that off. That's your purl. I'm going to keep showing you this one because it is kind of complicated. Around the front, around the back. Whoops, I slipped off. Okay. Sometimes that happens. Through the entire loop and slip it off. Okay. One more time. Through the front, around the back, push it through, and slip it off. So if you'll remember that pattern, through the front, around the back, push it through, slip it off. 4 steps. And you see what it's doing? It's putting one little bead of yarn at the base of the stitch. So I'm going to keep doing that. And then I'll come back. This right here, don't worry about that. It always happens in knitting projects. It always happens. It never fails. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you a few rows after I've done a few rows of the purl stitch, what it'll look like. Okay? This one's probably going to be a shorter video than the last one. Okay, so I've just finished my first row of purl. I'm going to set this needle down. And if you can see how it looks kind of similar to your knit stitch. But what it is it's the top loop right there that really matters. So if you'll see that again, it's this top one right here, not the bottom one so much, it's just the top. That's what's called the purl. So you're going to take it, you're going to turn it over again, pull your working yarn free so you can make more stitches. And you're going to do basically the same thing. Through the front, throw your yarn over it so that your yarn is always in front instead of in the back. Around the back and through the stitch again. You're going to keep wanting to move it forward just like the knit stitch. If it gets a little loose right there, like it is, don't worry about it. It happens with purl stitches. Through the front, around the back, through the stitch, and slip it off. Okay? Hang on. Try not to drop your needle, because if you drop your needle, you have to start all over. Because it's very difficult to get back to where you were when you're purl stitching. I'll show you one more time. Through the front, around the back, through the stitch, and slip it off. And for the second row, you're going to want to tighten it up just a little bit because it's going to be a little looser than the knit stitch. So just keep on doing that. And the second round is going to be easier. this from the second round throughout will be a lot easier than the first round, because the first round is always the most difficult because you're right on the needle trying to slip stitches off and put your needle through it and everything, and it's so difficult to do it that way. But also, this is kind of a thicker stitch than the knit stitch. I almost said purl. The purl stitch is kind of a thicker stitch than the knit stitch. As you can see, it's a lot thicker. So this one right here, I wouldn't say spend months at a time making a blanket with simply just purl stitch and knit stitch. But I mean, you could do that, but it takes forever making a blanket. If you want to make a blanket or anything bigger than a scarf, you're going to want to use a circular knitting needle, which is this right here. It's basically just 2 needles with a string attached. For a blanket, I'd recommend getting one with a longer string than this, just because it would be very, very crowded. But yeah, you can use circular knitting needles, or if you feel more comfortable with just a bunch of stitches crowded on one straight needle, you could use straight needles. For like a baby blanket, you could use straight needles. But anything bigger than a baby blanket, I would recommend circular needles. And when you're using circular needles, it's just the same as knitting on straight needles. So I'm going to work with this row with you for a minute. Okay. I keep having to free up my yarn. Once you get to working on it, the middle space right there will start shrinking up, so you won't have as much slack. But the first few stitches on the new row always has slack. I don't understand why. It's just how it is. See, like that gap right there? I don't like those gaps. But they disappear. They do disappear. But that's row 2. That's row 2. Flip it over. I like to scrunch mine up just because it's easier. I hold it with a pinky. It's easier to knit with the scrunched up project. Seeing all the slack in it, it'll end up disappearing. See? Alright. What you're going to want to do is just work it to however long you want it to be. And then I will also show you how to cast off. But that's a little bit complicated for first learners how to cast off. I've only done it a couple of times for shawls and stuff. I'm actually working on a shawl right now, but it's like halfway done. I still have half a ball. But you're going to want to keep working this. Like I said, it is thicker than the knit stitch because it's more yarn on there. But if you'll see, it starts forming the same chain link as the knit stitch does. But I'll come back in another video and show you how to cast off.